In the shadowed halls of Ravenscliff Manor, a playwright is found dead, a letter opener in his heart. Was it jealousy, revenge, or a secret buried in the past? Hercule Poirot, the brilliant Belgian detective, unravels a web of lies. Turkish cigarettes, a stopped clock, a lipstick-stained glass, and a hidden manuscript that threatens to expose a family's darkest truth. Who wrote the letter signed R? What drove a killer to strike in the dead of night? Step into a classic Agatha Christie mystery where every clue counts, and the truth will shock you. Chapter 1. The Invitation to Ravenscliff Manor. The late summer sun cast a golden haze over the rolling hills of Devon, where Ravenscliff Manor stood like a sentinel of a bygone era. Its grey stone facade, adorned with ivy and weathered by time, loomed over the meticulously trimmed lawns, exuding an air of grandeur tinged with melancholy. The manor was the ancestral home of the Ashbourne family, a name synonymous with wealth, influence, and secrets whispered behind closed doors. On this particular August afternoon in 1928, the air was thick with the scent of roses and an undercurrent of unease, as though the house itself sensed the storm brewing within its walls. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the loyal companion to the great Hercule Poirot, adjusted his tie as he stepped from the chauffeured car onto the gravel drive. He had received an invitation from Lady Eleanor Ashbourne, a widow of considerable charm and reputation, to join a weekend gathering at Ravenscliff. The invitation, penned in elegant script, had promised a celebration of her late husband's legacy, though Hastings suspected there was more to it than mere festivity. Lady Eleanor was not one for idle gatherings, and her note had carried a curious urgency beneath its polished surface. As Hastings surveyed the manor, he noted the eclectic assembly of guests arriving. There was Sir Reginald Thorne, a brusque industrialist with a penchant for blunt speech and a fortune in steel. Beside him stood his young wife, Clara, whose delicate beauty seemed at odds with the nervous flutter of her hands. Then there was Dr. Malcolm Fraser, a physician of quiet demeanor but sharp eyes, accompanied by his sister, Miss Beatrice Fraser, a spinster with a penchant for literature and a tongue that could cut like a scalpel. The final guests to emerge from their respective vehicles were Mr. Julian Carver, a playwright of some repute, and his fiancée, Miss Sylvia Langdon, a rising star of the London stage whose laughter rang like a bell across the drive. Hastings, ever observant in his own unassuming way, noted the subtle tensions among the group. Sir Reginald's gruff greeting to Julian Carver was met with a cool nod, and Clara Thorne's eyes lingered too long on the playwright before darting away. Beatrice Fraser, meanwhile, seemed to regard Sylvia Langdon with a mixture of curiosity and disdain, her lips pursed as though she had tasted.
The air was thick with unspoken rivalries, and Hastings felt a prickle of anticipation. He had long since learned that such gatherings, under the veneer of civility, often concealed darker currents. The great oak doors of Ravenscliff swung open, revealing Lady Eleanor herself. She was a woman of striking presence, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, her emerald green gown accentuating her poised figure. Her smile was warm, yet her grey eyes held a calculating glint as she welcomed her guests. "My dear friends," she said, her voice carrying the cadence of one accustomed to command. "How delightful that you could join me this weekend. Ravenscliff has been too quiet since my dear Charles passed, and I thought it fitting to gather those closest to him to honor his memory." Her words were met with murmurs of agreement, though Hastings noted the flicker of unease in Clara Thorne's expression and the way Julian Carver's hand tightened on Sylvia's arm. The group was ushered into the grand hall where a chandelier gleamed above a polished mahogany table set for dinner. The walls were lined with portraits of stern-faced Ashbournes, their eyes seeming to follow the guests with silent judgment. As the party settled into the drawing room for pre-dinner drinks, Hastings found himself seated beside Beatrice Fraser, who was leafing through a volume of Tennyson with an air of distraction. "A fine house, is it not, Miss Fraser?" he ventured, hoping to gauge her mood. She glanced up, her sharp eyes assessing him. "Fine, yes, but heavy with secrets, Captain Hastings. Houses like this always are. Don't you find it curious that Lady Eleanor has gathered such an eclectic group?" Hastings raised an eyebrow. "Eclectic, you say?" "Oh, come now," she said, lowering her voice. "A steel magnate, a playwright, an actress, a doctor, and myself, a mere observer of human folly. We are not here by chance. Lady Eleanor has a purpose, mark my words." Before Hastings could press further, the butler, a dour man named Grayson, announced dinner. The guests moved to the dining room, where the table was laden with crystal and silver. The meal was exquisite: roast pheasant, glazed vegetables, and a fine claret, but the conversation was stilted. Sir Reginald dominated with talk of business, while Clara picked at her food, her eyes darting to Julian Carver with unsettling frequency. Sylvia, for her part, laughed too loudly at the playwright's quips, drawing a scowl from Beatrice Fraser. Lady Eleanor, presiding at the head of the table, seemed to observe it all with quiet amusement. "Charles always said," she remarked at one point, "that a good dinner reveals more about people than a year of conversation. Don't you agree, Mr. Carver?" Julian Carver, whose boyish charm belied a certain wariness, elicited a chuckle from Sylvia, but a frown from Sir Reginald, who muttered something about frivolous artists. Hastings, ever attuned to such undercurrents, made a mental note of the exchange. He had seen enough of Poirot's cases to know that small frictions could lead to great crimes. As dessert was served, a delicate lemon soufflé, the conversation turned to the late Charles Ashbourne. Lady Eleanor spoke fondly of her husband, a man of letters and philanthropy, though her tone carried a trace of bitterness when she mentioned his many obligations. Hastings caught Dr. Fraser's quick glance at his sister, as though some unspoken thought passed between them. The evening drew to a close with coffee in the drawing room, where a fire crackled in the hearth. The guests dispersed to their rooms, and Hastings found himself alone with Lady Eleanor for a moment. She fixed him with her piercing gaze. "Captain Hastings," she said softly, "I trust you will enjoy your stay. I have a feeling this weekend will be illuminating." Her words lingered in his mind as he retired to his room, a spacious chamber overlooking the gardens. He sat at the writing desk, penning a quick letter to Poirot, who had been detained in London, but promised to join him at Ravencliff by morning. Hastings described the guests, the manner, and the strange undercurrents he had sensed. "My dear Poirot," he wrote, "I fear this gathering is not what it seems. There is a tension here, like a storm waiting to break. I await your arrival with great anticipation." As he sealed the letter, a faint sound reached his ears, a muffled cry, cut off abruptly. He froze, straining to listen, but the manor was silent once more. His heart quickened. Was it his imagination, or had something sinister already begun to unfold? Hastings rose and crossed to the window, peering into the darkness. The gardens below were bathed in moonlight, their shadows deep and impenetrable. He could not shake the feeling that Ravencliff Manor held secrets that would soon demand to be uncovered. With a sigh, he turned down the lamp and prepared for bed, trusting that Hercule Poirot's arrival would bring clarity to the enigma that was already taking shape. Little did he know that the morning would bring not clarity, but chaos. The shadow falls. The dawn broke over Ravencliff Manor with a deceptive calm, the first rays of sunlight filtering through the mist that clung to the Devon hills. The manor's stone walls glowed softly, but the serenity was shattered by a piercing scream that echoed through the corridors, just as the clock struck 7. Captain Arthur Hastings, roused from a fitful sleep, threw on his dressing gown and hurried toward the source of the sound, his heart pounding with a dread he could not yet name.
Pale as alabaster, stood trembling in the hallway, her hands clutching the folds of her silk robe. Beside her, Grayson, the butler, looked uncharacteristically shaken, his usual stoic demeanor fractured. Lady Eleanor Ashbourne emerged from the drawing room, her expression a mask of controlled alarm, while Sir Reginald Thorne's booming voice demanded to know what the devil was going on. It's Mr. Carver," Clara stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. He's dead." Hastings felt a chill settle over him. Julian Carver, the playwright, dead? He pushed past the gathering servants and followed Clara's trembling gesture toward the library door, which stood ajar. The room was dimly lit, the heavy curtains still drawn, but the faint glow of a table lamp revealed a grim scene. Julian Carver lay sprawled across the Persian rug, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling, a dark stain spreading across the front of his white shirt. A letter opener, its silver handle gleaming, protruded from his chest. Hastings knelt beside the body, careful not to disturb the scene. Carver's face bore a look of surprise, as though death had caught him unawares. The letter opener was embedded deeply, suggesting a strike of considerable force. A glass of brandy lay shattered on the floor nearby, its amber contents seeping into the rug. The air was heavy with the mingled scents of alcohol and blood, and Hastings felt a wave of nausea. He had seen death before, but its suddenness here, in the heart of Ravencliff, was unsettling. Lady Eleanor stepped into the room, her composure faltering for a moment as she took in the sight. "My God," she murmured, her hand rising to her throat. "Julian, how could this happen?" Sir Reginald, who had followed close behind, let out a grunt. Looks like someone had it in for the fellow. Not surprising, given his type, always stirring up trouble with his clever words. Clara shot her husband a sharp look, her eyes brimming with tears. "How can you say that, Reginald? He was a friend." "A friend, was he?" Sir Reginald's tone was laced with scorn. "Seemed a bit too friendly with you, my dear." The accusation hung in the air, and Hastings noted the way Clara's hands clenched into fists. Before the tension could escalate, Dr. Malcolm Fraser entered, his medical bag in hand. He knelt beside Carver, checking for a pulse with practiced efficiency, though his expression confirmed what was already clear. "He's been dead for some hours," Fraser said quietly. "Likely since the early hours of the morning. The wound is precise, straight to the heart." Beatrice Fraser, who had appeared silently at the doorway, fixed her brother with a piercing stare. "Precise, you say? That suggests a steady hand, does it not?" Dr. Fraser met her gaze, his jaw tightening. "It suggests nothing yet, Beatrice. Let us not leap to conclusions. Take stock of the room."
The library was a grand space, lined with shelves of leather-bound books and adorned with portraits of past Ashburns. A large mahogany desk stood near the window, its surface cluttered with papers, an inkwell, and the small clock that had stopped at 2:15. A fireplace, cold and unlit, dominated one wall, and above it hung a portrait of Charles Ashburn, his stern gaze seeming to survey the scene below. Hastings noted a single cigarette butt in the ashtray, its brand unfamiliar, and a faint smudge of red lipstick on the rim of a second glass, untouched, on a side table. Sylvia Langdon, Carver's fiancée, staggered into the room, her face a mask of horror. "Julian!" she cried, collapsing to her knees beside the body. Her sobs were raw, unfiltered, and Hastings felt a pang of sympathy. Yet, even in her grief, he noticed the way her eyes darted to the letter opener, then to the faces around her, as though searching for answers, or perhaps gauging reactions. Lady Eleanor took charge, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "Grayson, send for the police at once, and ensure no one leaves the manor until they arrive. We must preserve everything as it is." Grayson nodded and departed, his footsteps echoing in the silent hall. Hastings, however, felt a flicker of hope amidst the grim scene. He had sent his letter to Hercule Poirot the previous night, and if all went well, the little Belgian detective would arrive by midday.
Poirot's methodical mind and uncanny ability to unravel human motives would be invaluable in this tangled affair. As the guests retreated to the drawing room to await the police, Hastings lingered, committing every detail to memory. The stopped clock, the lipstick-stained glass, the cigarette butt, all were pieces of a puzzle that Poirot would surely delight in assembling. But for now, the atmosphere in the manor was thick with suspicion. Sir Reginald's accusation against Clara lingered, and Sylvia's grief seemed to carry an edge of something unspoken. Beatrice Fraser's sharp eyes missed nothing, while her brother's calm professionalism felt almost too perfect. The police arrived within the hour, led by Inspector Hargreaves, a dour man with a penchant for jumping to conclusions. He surveyed the scene with a cursory glance, declared it a clear case of murder, and began questioning the guests with a heavy-handed approach that Hastings knew would yield little. Hargreaves seemed particularly taken with the idea that Sylvia, as Carver's fiancée, had the strongest motive, especially after a servant mentioned overhearing an argument between the couple the previous evening. "It's always the lover, isn't it?" Hargreaves.
The guests. Clara Thorne sat rigidly, her hands folded tightly in her lap, while Sir Reginald paced like a caged lion. Beatrice Fraser scribbled notes in a small notebook, her lips pursed in thought. And Dr. Fraser offered quiet reassurances to Sylvia, who seemed on the verge of collapse. It was nearing noon when a familiar figure appeared at the manor's entrance, his small, precise steps and immaculate attire unmistakable. Hercule Poirot, his eyes gleaming with curiosity, stepped into the drawing room, his moustache impeccably groomed despite the early hour. Hastings felt a surge of relief. "Mon ami Hastings!" Poirot exclaimed, his voice warm but tinged with urgency. "I received your letter, and it seems I arrive at a most opportune moment. A murder, you say? Alors, let us see what the little grey cells can make of this." Lady Eleanor, clearly familiar with Poirot's reputation, greeted him with a mixture of relief and wariness. "Monsieur Poirot, your presence is most welcome. This is a terrible tragedy, and I fear it may tear us all apart." Poirot bowed slightly, his eyes scanning the room. "Madame, tragedy often reveals the truth, though it hides behind many masks. I shall require access to the scene, and I must speak with each of you in turn. The truth, it is like a diamond, hidden but always there for those who know where to look." As Poirot moved toward the library, Hastings followed, his mind already anticipating the detective's methodical approach. The stopped clock, the lipstick, the cigarette, they were clues, yes, but Poirot would see beyond them to the human heart at the core of this crime. The shadow had fallen over Ravencliff Manor, and only Poirot's brilliance could pierce its darkness. Chapter 3. The Arrival of Poirot. The library at Ravencliff Manor, where the lifeless body of Julian Carver still lay, was now a hive of quiet activity as Hercule Poirot stepped inside, his small, precise figure a stark contrast to the grim scene. The air was heavy with the scent of old books and the faint, metallic tang of blood. Captain Arthur Hastings followed closely, noting the familiar gleam in Poirot's eyes, a sign that the little Belgian detective's mind was already at work, piecing together the puzzle before him. The police, under Inspector Hargreaves's direction, had cordoned off the area, but Poirot's presence seemed to shift the atmosphere,
as though the room itself shattered brandy glass, the stopped clock at 2:15, the cigarette butt in the ashtray, and the second glass with its telltale smudge of red lipstick. Poirot's gaze lingered on each detail, his expression unreadable but intense. Inspector Hargreaves, who had been barking orders to a young constable, approached with a scowl. "Monsieur Poirot, is it? I've heard of you. But this is a police matter, and I'll thank you to stay out of our way." Poirot's smile was polite but firm. "Monsieur l'Inspecteur, I have no wish to interfere. I am merely a guest of Lady Eleanor, offering my humble assistance. The truth, it benefits us all, no?" Hargreaves grunted, clearly unimpressed, but he allowed Poirot to proceed, perhaps sensing that resistance was futile. Poirot knelt beside the body, his movements deliberate, almost reverent. He examined the letter opener without touching it, noting its ornate silver handle and the precision of the wound. "A single thrust," he murmured. "Direct, forceful, and without hesitation. This was not a crime of passion, Hastings, but one of intent." He rose and moved to the desk where the stopped clock caught his attention. "Curieux," he said, tapping his finger against his lips. "A clock that stops at 2:15, yet the good doctor says death occurred hours ago. Was it stopped deliberately, or is this a mechanical failure? We shall see." Next, Poirot inspected the cigarette butt, sniffing it delicately. "A Turkish blend, most unusual, not a common choice in Devon, I think." His eyes flicked to the second glass, the lipstick smudge vivid against the crystal. "And this, rouge à lèvres. A clue, perhaps, or a distraction. Women, they are not the only ones who wear such things in the world of the theatre, n'est-ce pas?" Hastings frowned, catching Poirot's meaning. Julian Carver, a playwright, and Sylvia Langdon, an actress, both were tied to the stage, where appearances could deceive. But before he could pursue the thought, Poirot moved to the fireplace, where the portrait of Charles Ashburn gazed down. "The late Master of Ravencliff," Poirot mused. "He watches us still, does he not?" The detective's inspection was interrupted by Lady Eleanor, who entered with a composed but strained expression. "Monsieur Poirot, have you found anything of note?" she asked, her voice betraying a hint of anxiety. "Madame," Poirot replied, bowing slightly, "I have found many things, but their meaning is not yet clear. I would speak with your guests, if I may. Each has a story, and I wish to hear them all." Lady Eleanor nodded, gesturing toward the drawing room, where the guests had gathered under the watchful eye of a constable. As Poirot and Hastings made their way there, Hastings couldn't help but marvel at Poirot's calm authority. The detective's presence seemed to steady the household, even as suspicion silence. Sylvia Langdon, her eyes red from crying, clutched a handkerchief, while Clara Thorne sat rigidly beside her husband, Sir Reginald, whose impatience was palpable. Dr. Malcolm Fraser stood by the window, his expression unreadable, while Beatrice Fraser continued to scribble in her notebook, her sharp gaze darting between the others. The tension was palpable, each guest aware that they were now suspects in a murder. Poirot took a seat in a high-backed chair, his demeanor serene yet commanding. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice clear and measured. "A tragedy has occurred, and we must seek the truth. I ask for your cooperation. I wish to know where each of you was between midnight and 3 this morning when Monsieur Carver met his fate." The question sparked a flurry of responses, some defensive, others hesitant. Sir Reginald was the first to speak, his tone gruff. "I was in my room, asleep. Clara can vouch for me. We retired together round 11. Clara nodded, but her eyes flickered downward. "Yes, that's right," she said softly, though Hastings noted the slight tremor in her voice. Sylvia Langdon's voice broke as she spoke. "Julian and we had a disagreement last night after dinner. Nothing serious, just a silly spat. I went to my room around 10:30 and stayed there. I didn't see him again until
Her voice trailed off, and she buried her face in her handkerchief. Dr. Fraser cleared his throat. I was in my room reading. I heard nothing unusual, though I did see a light under Julian's door around midnight when I passed by on my way to fetch a glass of water. Beatrice Fraser closed her notebook with a snap. I was awake until 1, writing. My room is at the end of the corridor, and I heard footsteps around 1:30, but I couldn't say whose. This house creaks like an old ship. Lady Eleanor, standing by the fireplace, spoke last. I retired at 11 and slept soundly. Grayson can confirm that the house was locked and secure, as is our custom. Poirot listened intently, his eyes moving from one face to another, as though reading the thoughts behind their words. Merci, he said at last. Your accounts are most helpful, but I must ask, did any of you see or speak with Monsieur Carver after dinner? A small detail perhaps, but it may be significant. A heavy silence followed. Finally, Clara Thorne spoke, her voice barely audible. I saw him briefly in the hall around 10. He seemed agitated, but he didn't say why.
So was secretive about it, and I teased him, saying he was hiding something from me. He got upset and said I wouldn't understand. That was all. Poirot nodded, his expression inscrutable. And his play, do any of you know its subject? The guests exchanged glances, but none spoke. Beatrice Fraser, however, raised an eyebrow. Julian was always cagey about his work. He said this one would shake the foundations of Ravencliff. His words, not mine. Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign Hastings recognized as interest. Most intriguing. I shall require access to Monsieur Carver's papers, Lady Eleanor, if you permit. Of course, she replied, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. As the interviews concluded, Poirot rose, his demeanor as calm as ever. Mes amis, the truth lies in the details, the words unspoken, the glances exchanged. I ask you to remain here under the eye of the good Inspector Hargreaves. I shall return soon. Outside in the corridor, Hastings couldn't contain his curiosity. What do you make of it, Poirot? The alibis, the clues. There's something off, isn't there? Poirot's eyes twinkled. Mon cher, there is always something off. The clock, the lipstick, the cigarette, they are pieces of a mosaic, but it is the human heart that holds the key. Come, we have work to do. As they returned to the library, Hastings felt the weight of the mystery deepen. Poirot's arrival had set the wheels in motion, but the truth remained elusive, hidden in the shadows of Ravencliff Manor. Chapter 4. The Questions Deepen. The library at Ravencliff Manor, now a somber shrine to Julian Carver's untimely death, seemed to hum with secrets as Hercule Poirot moved methodically through its confines. The morning light filtered through the heavy curtains, casting long shadows across the Persian rug where the playwright's body still lay, untouched pending the coroner's arrival. Captain Arthur Hastings stood near the door, watching Poirot's precise movements with a mixture of admiration and impatience. The little Belgian detective's calm deliberation was a stark contrast to the chaos that had gripped the household since the discovery of the murder. Poirot, his gloved hands clasped behind his back, circled the room once more, his eyes darting from the stopped clock to the lipstick-stained glass, then to the cigarette butt in the ashtray. Hastings, he said, his voice soft but commanding. The scene of a crime is like a book. Each page must be read carefully, lest we miss the meaning hidden between the lines. Hastings nodded, though he felt a pang of frustration. But Poirot, surely the letter opener, the time of death, those are the key points, aren't they? And that lipstick, it must belong to one of the women here. Poirot's mustache twitched with a faint smile. Mon cher, you leap to the obvious as always. The lipstick, it is a clue, oui, but not necessarily.
Woman's. The theatre, it blurs such distinctions. And the letter opener, its presence is too convenient, no? We must dig deeper. He approached the desk, where a scattering of papers lay in disarray. Among them was a notebook, its leather cover worn but embossed with Carver's initials.
Poirot opened it carefully, revealing pages filled with hurried scrawls, notes for a play, fragments of dialogue, and cryptic phrases. One entry, underlined heavily, read, "The truth lies in the shadow of the raven." Poirot's eyes narrowed. Curieux. This play of his, it seems to have been more than mere entertainment. Hastings peered over his shoulder. The shadow of the raven. Could it refer to Ravencliff itself? Perhaps, Poirot murmured, flipping through the pages. Or perhaps it is a metaphor for something, or someone hidden in plain sight. We shall see. Their inspection was interrupted by the arrival of Inspector Hargreaves, who entered with a brusque air. "Monsieur Poirot, I've questioned the staff. The butler, Grayson, confirms the house was locked tight last night, and no one saw anything unusual after midnight. Looks like an inside job, if you ask me." Poirot inclined his head politely. "An astute observation, Inspector. But it is the why and the how that intrigues me. I would speak with the guests again, in private, if you permit. The human heart, it reveals itself in solitude." Hargreaves shrugged, clearly skeptical, but unwilling to challenge Poirot's reputation. "Do as you like, but don't interfere with my men. I'm leaning towards the fiancée, Miss Langdon. That argument they had last night, it's suspicious." Poirot said nothing, but his expression suggested he found the inspector's haste amusing. He turned to Hastings. "Come, mon ami. Let us begin with Mademoiselle Langdon. Her grief. It is genuine, but grief can hide many things." In a small parlor adjacent to the drawing room, Sylvia Langdon sat alone, her face pale, and her eyes hollow. She rose as Poirot and Hastings entered, clutching her handkerchief as though it were a lifeline. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice trembling, "I can't believe Julian is gone. Who could do such a thing?" Poirot took a seat opposite her, his demeanor gentle but probing. "Mademoiselle, my condolences, but I must ask, your disagreement with Monsieur Carver last night, what was its true nature? You spoke of his play, but was there more?" Sylvia's eyes flickered, and she hesitated before answering. "It was silly."
Chair, even with me. I thought he was just being theatrical, but now. A voice broke and she looked away. Poirot's gaze softened, but his questions pressed on. "And after your argument, you went to your room. Did you see him again? Or hear anything in the night?" Sylvia shook her head. "No. I was upset, so I took a sleeping draught and went to bed. I didn't wake until the scream this morning." Poirot nodded, making a mental note. "One final question, mademoiselle. Did Monsieur Carver ever mention a connection between his play and anyone here at Ravencliff?" Sylvia frowned as though searching her memory. He did say something about Charles Ashbourne, Lady Eleanor's late husband. He said the play was inspired by a story Charles once told him, something about a betrayal. But he wouldn't elaborate. "Merci, mademoiselle," Poirot said, rising. "You have been most helpful." As Sylvia left, Hastings whispered, "Do you believe her, Poirot? That sleeping draught story sounds convenient." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Convenient, oui, but not necessarily false. We shall verify. Now, let us speak with Madame Thorne." Clara Thorne entered the parlor with a nervous air, her delicate features drawn tight. She sat stiffly, her hands folded in her lap, and avoided Poirot's gaze. "Monsieur Poirot," she began, "I don't know what I can tell you. This is all so dreadful." "Madame," Poirot said smoothly, "you mentioned seeing Monsieur Carver in the hall last night. He was agitated, you said. Can you recall his exact words?" Clara hesitated, her fingers tightening. He said something about needing to finish what he started. He seemed distracted, almost afraid. I asked if he was all right, but he brushed me off and said it was nothing." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And your relationship with Monsieur Carver, was it merely friendly, as you told your husband?" Clara's cheeks flushed. "Of course.
Julian was charming, nothing more. We spoke a few times in London, at theatre events. Reginald he's jealous, that's all. Jealousy, Poirot mused, is a powerful motive. Tell me, madame, where were you between midnight and 3? In my room, Clara said quickly. With Reginald. We retired together, as he told you. Poirot nodded, but his expression suggested he was not entirely convinced. As Clara left, he turned to Hastings. She hides something, mon ami. Her fear. It is not only for her husband's temper. The interviews continued through the afternoon. Sir Reginald Thorne was belligerent, insisting he slept soundly and saw nothing, though his impatience suggested he was withholding details. Dr. Malcolm Fraser was calm, almost too composed, claiming he heard nothing after midnight. Beatrice Fraser, however, was more forthcoming, her sharp tongue cutting through the pleasantries. Julian Carver was a fool, she said bluntly. He thought he'd old wounds and not pay a price. His play was about Ravencliff, I'm sure of it. He hinted as much to me yesterday. Said it would rattle the cages. And whose cage, Mademoiselle Fraser? Poirot asked. Beatrice smirked. Take your pick. This house is full of secrets. Charles Ashbourne wasn't the saint Eleanor makes him out to be, you know. Ask her about his business dealings. Or his enemies. Poirot's final interview was with Lady Eleanor herself. She entered the parlour with her usual poise, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Monsieur Poirot, she said, I trust you're making progress? Progress, madame, is a matter of patience, Poirot replied. Tell me, what was the nature of your husband's relationship with Monsieur Carver? Lady Eleanor's expression tightened. Charles admired Julian's talent. They corresponded often, and Charles even funded one of his early plays. Julian was grateful, but I sensed he was probing into Charles's past lately. I don't know why. And this play of his? Poirot pressed. Did it concern your husband? I don't know, she said, her voice sharp. Julian was secretive. If he was digging into Charles's life, he didn't share it with me. As the interviews concluded, Poirot and Hastings returned to the library. The detective stood by the desk, his fingers brushing the notebook. Hastings, he said, this play, it is the key. It stirred passions, provoked fear. We must find it. As the afternoon waned, the manor seemed to close in around them, its walls whispering of secrets yet to be uncovered. Poirot's questions had peeled back the first layers, but the heart of the mystery remained elusive, buried in the shadows of Ravencliff. Chapter 5. The Red Herrings. The afternoon sun cast long, slanting rays through the tall windows of Ravencliff Manor, bathing the drawing-room in a golden glow that did little to dispel the chill of suspicion that hung over the gathered guests. Hercule Poirot, his impeccable suit unruffled despite the day's grim events, sat in a high-backed chair, his sharp eyes moving from one face to another. Captain Arthur Hastings, standing by the fireplace, felt the weight of the silence, broken only by the occasional crackle of the fire and the distant ticking of a grandfather clock in the hall. The murder of Julian Carver had cast a shadow over the manor, and Poirot's methodical probing had begun to stir unease among the suspects. Inspector Hargreaves, ever the man of action, had taken center stage, pacing before the assembled group with the air of a hunter closing in on his prey. A break in your engagement. Care to explain? Sylvia's eyes widened, and she clutched her handkerchief tightly. A letter? I don't know anything about it. Julian and I argued, yes, but it wasn't serious. We loved each other. Hargreaves produced a folded piece of paper from his pocket, handling it with exaggerated care. Found this tucked in his desk drawer, he said, unfolding it for all to see. The letter, written in Carver's hasty scrawl, read, Sylvia, I cannot go on like this. Your doubts wound me deeply. If you cannot trust me, perhaps we are better apart. The room erupted in murmurs. Clara Thorne's hand flew to her mouth, while Sir Reginald let out a derisive snort. Beatrice Fraser's pen paused over her notebook, her eyes gleaming with interest. Hastings, watching closely, noted the way Sylvia's shoulders slumped, as though the letter had struck a blow she could not counter. Poirot, however, remained unmoved, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Monsieur l'Inspecteur," he said calmly, "this letter, it is most interesting, but it does not tell the whole story. A man may write in anger and regret it later. We must not be too quick to judge." Hargreaves bristled. "Quick? It's plain as day, Poirot. She had motive, jealousy, betrayal. And that lipstick on the glass in the library? Matches the shade she's wearing, I'd wager." Sylvia gasped, her hand rising to her lips. "That's absurd. I wasn't in the library last night. I told you I took a sleeping draught and stayed in my room." Poirot's gaze flicked to her lips, then to the other women in the room. "The lipstick, it is a clue, oui, but not conclusive. Many shades are similar, and as I've said, the theatre complicates such matters. Let us proceed with care." Hastings, ever loyal to Poirot's methods, sensed that the detective was steering the conversation away from Sylvia, perhaps to prevent Hargreaves from fixating too soon. The letter and the lipstick were compelling, but Poirot had taught him that the most obvious clues often led to dead ends, red herrings designed to obscure the truth. To shift the focus, Poirot turned to Sir Reginald Thorn. "Monsieur Thorn, you spoke harshly of Monsieur Carver last night, did you not? You called him a frivolous artist? Was there bad blood between you?" Sir Reginald's face reddened, his moustache quivering with indignation. "Bad blood? The man was a nuisance, always sniffing around my wife. But I didn't kill him, if that's what you're implying. I was in bed, as I said." Clara Thorne's eyes darted to her husband, then away, her fingers twisted.
"Hurry." Hargreaves seized on this. "A meeting, eh? Sounds like he was expecting trouble. Maybe he met his killer in that library." Poirot's expression remained serene, but Hastings could see the wheels turning in his mind. The detective turned to Dr. Malcolm Fraser, whose calm demeanor had not wavered. "Doctor, you passed Monsieur Carver's room around midnight. Did you see anyone else in the corridor?" Fraser shook his head. "No one. The house was quiet, though I did hear voices from the library earlier, around 11. I couldn't make out what was said." Beatrice Fraser, ever quick to interject, closed her notebook with a snap. "Voices, Malcolm. How convenient that you didn't investigate. And what about you, Lady Eleanor? You've been awfully quiet about your own movements." Lady Eleanor, standing by the window, turned with a cool smile. "Miss Fraser, I have nothing to hide. I was in my room as I told Monsieur Poirot. Grayson locked the house at 10, as is our custom. If Julian met someone in the library, it was not by my arrangement." The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over the group. Hastings, watching closely, noted the subtle glances exchanged. Clara's nervous look at Sir Reginald, Sylvia's tearful stare at the floor, and Beatrice's calculating gaze. The letter and the lipstick had shifted suspicion towards Sylvia, but Poirot's questions were sowing doubt, suggesting that the truth lay deeper. Poirot rose, his small frame commanding attention. "Mesdames et messieurs, the clues we have, the letter, the lipstick, the stopped clock, they are like the threads of a tapestry. Alone they mean little. Together they will reveal the pattern. I ask you to remain patient while I continue my inquiries." As the guests dispersed, Hargreaves pulled Poirot aside. "You're muddying the waters, Poirot. That letter points straight to the girl. Why drag this out?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Monsieur l'Inspecteur, the obvious is rarely the truth. The letter, it is a red herring meant to distract us. We must look beyond it to the heart of the matter." Hargreaves snorted but said no more, stomping off to confer with his constable. Hastings, following Poirot back to the library, couldn't resist asking, "Do you really think the letter's a distraction? It seems damning for Sylvia." Poirot paused by the desk, picking up Carver's notebook once more. "The letter, mon ami, is too perfect. It was placed where it would be found, written in a moment of passion, but left unfinished. Why did Carver not send it? And why was it tucked away so neatly? No, it is meant to lead us astray. He flipped through the notebook, pausing at a page with a hastily drawn sketch. A raven perched on a branch, its eye rendered with unsettling detail. Below it was a single word: betrayal. Poirot's lips pursed. This play of his, Hastings. It was a dangerous undertaking. It stirred old wounds.
Provoked hidden enemies. We must find the manuscript. They searched the library, but the manuscript was nowhere to be found. The desk yielded only notes and fragments, and Carver's room, searched earlier by the police, contained little of note beyond the letter. Poirot, undeterred, turned his attention to the ashtray. "This cigarette," he said, holding it up to the light. "It is a clue we cannot ignore. Turkish, rare, and out of place in this house. Who smokes such a brand?" Hastings frowned. "None of the guests mentioned smoking, but I suppose we could ask Grayson. The staff might know." "Précisément," Poirot said. "And the clock stopped at 2:15, yet the doctor places death earlier. Either it was stopped deliberately, or it is a coincidence. And Hercule Poirot does not believe in coincidences." As they left the library, the manor seemed to close in around them, its corridors heavy with unspoken truths. The letter and the lipstick had pointed fingers, but Poirot's probing had revealed their fragility as evidence. The red herrings were multiplying, but Hastings trusted that Poirot's little grey cells were already unraveling the tangle, inching closer to the heart of Ravencliff's deadly secret. Chapter 6. A Clue in Detail. The late afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of Ravencliff Manor, casting intricate patterns on the polished floors as Hercule Poirot stood in the library, his eyes fixed on the small, stopped clock on the mahogany desk. The hands, frozen at 2:15, seemed to mock the passage of time, a silent witness to the murder of Julian Carver. Captain Arthur Hastings, standing nearby, watched as Poirot's fingers hovered over the clock, not touching it, but studying it with the intensity of an artist examining a masterpiece. The room, still cordoned off by Inspector Hargreaves's men, was a tableau of clues, each one a thread in the intricate tapestry Poirot was determined to unravel. "Mon cher Hastings," Poirot said, his voice low and thoughtful, "this clock, it is not merely a decoration. It is a voice, speaking to us of the moment the crime was committed, or perhaps of the moment someone wished us to believe it was committed." Hastings frowned, his practical mind grappling with Poirot's cryptic words. "But Dr. Fraser said Carver died hours before 2:15, didn't he? So the clock must have been stopped deliberately, to mislead us." Poirot's moustache twitched with a faint smile. "Précisément. But why 2:15? Why not midnight or 3? The choice of time, it is deliberate, a message we have yet to decipher. Come, let us examine it closely." Poirot lifted the clock. "It failed of its own accord. We must test its reliability." He set the clock down and moved to the ashtray, where the single Turkish cigarette butt still lay, its faint aroma lingering. "This, too, is a detail that speaks," Poirot said. "A cigarette of such rarity does not belong to a casual smoker. We must inquire further." Hastings, eager to contribute, suggested, "Shall I ask Grayson about the cigarette? The staff might know who smokes such a brand." "An excellent idea, mon ami," Poirot replied. "But first, let us revisit the glass with the lipstick. It is a clue that has drawn much attention, but perhaps not the right kind." The second glass, untouched on the side table, bore the smudge of red lipstick that had so captivated Inspector Hargreaves. Poirot examined it closely, tilting it to catch the light. The shade, it is bold, dramatic, suited to the stage, perhaps. But it is not unique. Many women and some men might use such a color. We must not assume it points only to Mademoiselle Langdon. Hastings nodded. recalling Poirot's earlier comment about the theatre blurring distinctions.
You think it could belong to someone else? Clara Thorne, perhaps? Or even Lady Eleanor?
Poirot's eyes gleamed. Or perhaps it is a plant meant to mislead the mind of the murderer. It is cunning, Hastings. We must match it with equal cunning. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Grayson, the butler, summoned at Poirot's request. The man's dour expression was unchanged, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease as he stood before the detective. "You wish to see me, sir?" he asked, his voice steady but formal. "Oui, Monsieur Grayson," Poirot said, his tone genial but probing. "Tell me, do you know of anyone in this household who smokes Turkish cigarettes?" Grayson's brow furrowed slightly. "Turkish cigarettes, sir? They're not common here. The late Mr. Ashburn smoked them occasionally, but none of the current guests to my knowledge. I did find a packet in Mr. Carver's room when I tidied it yesterday, but he never smoked in my presence." Poirot's interest sharpened. "A packet, you say? And where is it now?" "I left it on his dresser, sir," Grayson replied. "The police may have taken it when they searched the room." "Merci, Grayson," Poirot said, dismissing him with a nod. As the butler departed, Poirot turned to Hastings. "This is most significant. If Carver had such cigarettes, why was only one found in the library? And why was it smoked at all, if he was not seen with it?" Hastings scratched his head. "Perhaps someone took the packet after the murder to cover their tracks?"
Hargreaves' reluctant permission, they entered, finding the space much as it had been described. A suitcase half unpacked, a typewriter on a small desk, and a few personal items scattered about. The dresser, however, held no packet of Turkish cigarettes, only a comb, a watch, and a few coins. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the room, his attention drawn to a small wastebasket by the desk. Inside, crumpled among scraps of paper, was a single sheet torn from a notebook, its edges singed, as though someone had attempted to burn it. Poirot smoothed the paper carefully, revealing a fragment of dialogue. "The raven sees all, but speaks not. Its shadow hides the truth." Below it, in Carver's handwriting, was a list of initials: E.A., R.T., C.T., M.F., B.F., S.L. The list matched the guests at Ravenscliffe: Lady Eleanor Ashbourne, Sir Reginald Thorne, Clara Thorne, Dr. Malcolm Fraser, Beatrice Fraser, and Sylvia Langdon. "Hastings," Poirot said, his voice tinged with excitement. "This is no mere note. It is a map to the murderer's mind. Carver knew something, and this play of his was a threat to someone here." Hastings stared at the paper, his mind racing. But who? The initials point to everyone. And why burn it? "To conceal, but not destroy," Poirot replied. "The singed edges suggest haste, not completion. Someone wanted this hidden, but they were interrupted, or perhaps they wished us to find it, to confuse us further." They returned to the library, where Poirot's attention shifted back to the stopped clock. He wound it carefully, setting it to the correct time, and watched as it ticked steadily. "The clock, it functions perfectly," he said. "It was stopped deliberately, Hastings, to fix our attention on 2:15. But why? To establish an alibi, to obscure the true time of death." As they pondered this, a soft knock at the door announced Beatrice Fraser, her sharp eyes glinting with curiosity. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, "I couldn't help overhearing your interest in the clock. I thought you should know. I saw Clara Thorne in the hall near the library last night, around 2 o'clock. She was carrying something, but I couldn't see what." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "You are certain of the time, Mademoiselle Fraser?" "As certain as I am of my own name," she replied, her tone crisp. "I couldn't sleep, so I was writing in my room. I stepped out to fetch a glass of water and saw her." "Merci," Poirot said, dismissing her with a nod. As she left, he turned to Hastings. "This is most interesting. Madame Thorne did not mention being out of her room at 2, and yet her husband claims they were together. A contradiction, no?" Hastings nodded, his excitement growing. "It's a solid clue, Poirot. Clara's been nervous from the start. Could she be the one?"
Poirot's smile was enigmatic. A clue, but we must tread care.
Present, but not always seen. We shall speak with Madame Thorne again, but first, we must find that manuscript. It holds the key to Carver's death. As the day waned, the library seemed to grow heavier with secrets, each clue a stopped clock, a cigarette, a singed note, pointing to a truth that remained just out of reach. Poirot's little grey cells were at work, and Hastings knew that the detective was closing in on the heart of the mystery, one meticulous step at a time. Chapter 7. More Lies Surface. The twilight descended over Ravencliff Manor, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns and deepening the oppressive atmosphere within its walls. The murder of Julian Carver had unraveled the veneer of civility among the guests, and as Hercule Poirot sat in the small parlour, his eyes gleamed with the quiet intensity of a man who sensed the truth drawing nearer. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated nearby, felt the weight of the day's revelations, the stopped clock, the Turkish cigarette, the singed note with its cryptic list of initials. Each clue was a piece of the puzzle, but the picture remained incomplete, obscured by the lies and half-truths that were now beginning to surface. Poirot had requested a private meeting with Clara Thorne, whose nervous demeanour and contradictory account had piqued his interest. She entered the parlour with a hesitant step, her delicate features drawn tight, her hands twisting the lace of her handkerchief. The flickering light of a single lamp cast her face in sharp relief, highlighting the fear in her eyes. "Madame Thorne," Poirot began, his voice gentle but firm, "you have told us you were in your room with your husband at 2 o'clock this morning. Yet Mademoiselle Fraser claims to have seen you in the hall near the library. It is a contradiction, no? I ask you to tell me the truth." Clara's eyes darted to Hastings, then back to Poirot, her breath catching. I didn't want to say anything because it would look suspicious. But yes, I was in the hall. I couldn't sleep, so I went to fetch a book from the library. I didn't go inside, I swear. I only stood at the door. Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign Hastings recognized as skepticism. "And what time was this, madame?" Clara hesitated, her fingers tightening on the handkerchief. "It was just before 2, I think. I didn't check the clock. But I saw no one, and I heard nothing. I returned to my room straight away." Poirot leaned forward slightly, his gaze piercing. "And this book you sought, what was its title?" Clara flushed, her voice faltering. I don't recall. I changed my mind and went back to bed." "Curieux," Poirot murmured, his tone neutral but laden with meaning. "You risk leaving your room at such an hour, yet you cannot name the book."
"I didn't see Julian or anyone. Please, you must believe me." Poirot nodded, dismissing her with a polite gesture, but as she left, Hastings whispered, "She's lying, isn't she? That story about the book, it's flimsy." "Oui, mon ami," Poirot replied, his voice slow. "Madame Thorne hides something, but whether it is guilt or fear, we cannot yet say. Her lie, it is clumsy, but it protects someone or something." Their next interview was with Sir Reginald Thorne, whose bluster had grown more pronounced as the day wore on. He entered the parlour with a scowl, his heavy footsteps echoing on the polished floor.
"This is outrageous, Poirot," he barked. "My wife is no murderer, and I won't have her harassed with your questions."
Poirot remained unruffled, his hands folded neatly in his lap. "Monsieur Thorne, I seek only the truth. Your wife was seen in the hall at 2, yet you claim you were both asleep. Can you explain this?" Sir Reginald's face reddened, his moustache bristling.
"Clara was restless last night. She might have stepped out for a moment, but she was back in bed by 2. I'd have noticed if she was gone longer."
"And you, monsieur?" Poirot pressed. "Did you have any dealings with Monsieur Carver that might shed light on his death? He was, as you say, too friendly with your wife." Sir Reginald's eyes narrowed.
"If you're suggesting I killed him, you're barking up the wrong tree. Yes, I didn't like the man. Too smooth, too clever by half. But I'm no murderer. I was in my room, as I've said.
Poirot's gaze lingered on him, but he nodded, allowing Sir Reginald to leave. As the door closed, Hastings muttered, "He's covering for her, isn't he? Or maybe he's hiding something himself." "Both are possible," Poirot said, his voice thoughtful. "But there is more here than jealousy. Let us turn to the good doctor and his sister." Dr. Malcolm Fraser entered next, his calm demeanour a stark contrast to Sir Reginald's bluster. He sat with an air of quiet confidence, his hands resting lightly on his knees.
"Monsieur Poirot," he said, "I've told you all I know. I saw a light on the carver's door at midnight, but I heard nothing after that."
Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And yet, Doctor, you mentioned hearing voices in the library earlier around 11? Can you recall anything of their tone? Anger, perhaps, or fear?" Fraser frowned as though searching his memory.
"They were low, urgent. I couldn't make out words, but it sounded like an argument. I assumed it was Carver and Miss Langdon, given their spat at dinner."
Poirot nodded, filing the information away. "And your sister, Mademoiselle Fraser? She is most observant. Has she shared any insights with you?" Fraser's expression tightened.
"Beatrice has her theories, but she's always been fanciful. She thinks Carver's play was about Charles Ashburn's business dealings."
Scandal he uncovered. I told her it's nonsense. "Indeed," Poirot said, his tone neutral. "Merci, doctor." Beatrice Fraser was the last to be questioned, her sharp eyes glinting with a mix of amusement and defiance as she took her seat. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, "you're wasting time with these polite inquiries. Carver's play was the key. He told me it was inspired by a letter he found in Charles Ashbourne's papers, a letter hinting at a betrayal that cost someone dearly." Poirot's interest sharpened. "A letter, mademoiselle? Can you describe it?" Beatrice smirked. "He didn't show it to me, but he said it was written by someone close to Charles, someone who felt wronged. He was obsessed with it, said it would make his play a sensation." "And where is this letter now?" Poirot asked. Beatrice shrugged. "I don't know. He kept it close, probably in his room. But if it's gone, someone took it." As Beatrice left, Poirot turned to Hastings, his expression grave. "The lies. They multiply, mon ami. Madame Thorne's story crumbles. Sir Reginald protects her. The doctor is too calm, and Mademoiselle Fraser, she knows more than she says. This letter, it is the heart of the matter." They returned to Carver's room, searching once more for the elusive letter. Among his papers, they found a locked diary, its key missing. Poirot, with a deft touch, used a paperclip to pick the lock, revealing pages filled with cryptic notes about the play. One entry stood out. "The letter is proof. E.A. knows, but denies. Must confront, but at what cost?" Hastings' eyes widened. "E.A.? Lady Eleanor? Could she be involved?" Poirot's lips pursed. "Perhaps, but we must not jump to conclusions. The letter, the play, the cigarette, all are connected to Charles Ashbourne's past. We must speak with Lady Eleanor again, but carefully." As night fell, the manor seemed to pulse with secrets, each lie peeling back to reveal another. Poirot's probing had exposed cracks in the guests' stories, but the truth remained elusive, hidden in the shadows of Ravencliff's past. Hastings felt a thrill of anticipation, knowing that Poirot's little grey cells were closing in on the killer, one lie at a time. Chapter 8. The Emotional Turning Point. The air in Ravencliff Manor grew heavier as night deepened, the flickering candles in the drawing-room casting long, wavering shadows across the faces of the assembled guests. The murder of Julian Carver had stripped away the last vestiges of decorum, leaving raw nerves and unspoken accusations in its wake. Her revelations had brought them closer to the truth, but the heart of the mystery remained elusive. Poirot had requested the guests gather after dinner, a move that had set tongues wagging and pulses racing. Inspector Hargreaves, still clinging to his theory about Sylvia Langdon,
stood by the door, his arms crossed and his expression sour. The detective's insistence on exploring every detail had clearly worn on his patience. But Poirot was undeterred. His mind focused on a single goal: to provoke a crack in the facade of one of the suspects. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "We have learned much today, but the truth, it hides still in the shadows. Monsieur Carver's death was no accident, no crime of passion. It was planned, deliberate, and rooted in a secret he uncovered, a secret tied to his play and to the past of this house." The guests shifted uncomfortably. Sylvia Langdon's hands trembled as she clutched her shawl, her eyes red from crying. Clara Thorne sat rigidly beside her husband, Sir Reginald, whose scowl deepened with every word. Dr. Malcolm Fraser maintained his calm demeanour, but his fingers tapped lightly on his knee, betraying a hint of unease. Beatrice Fraser, her notebook open, scribbled furiously, her lips pursed in anticipation. Lady Eleanor Ashbourne, standing by the window, fixed Poirot with a steady gaze, though her hands betrayed a slight tremor. Poirot's eyes settled on Lady Eleanor. "Madame," he said, "you have told us that Monsieur Carver was a friend of your late husband Charles, yet we find in his diary a note suggesting he knew of a betrayal, one that implicated you, a letter, perhaps, that he intended to use in his play. What can you tell us of this?" Lady Eleanor's composure faltered, her grey eyes widening. "A letter? I know of no such thing, Monsieur Poirot. Julian was curious about Charles's life, yes, but he never spoke of betrayal to me." Poirot's gaze did not waver. "And yet his diary suggests otherwise. 'EA knows but denies,' he wrote. Why would he write such a thing, madame, if not because he believed you held a secret?" The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words pressing down like a storm cloud. Lady Eleanor's lips parted, but before she could respond, Sylvia Langdon let out a choked sob, her voice breaking the tension. "Stop it!" she cried, rising to her feet. "You're all tearing each other apart, and for what? Julian is dead, and I can't bear it." Her outburst was raw, her face crumpling as tears streamed down her cheeks. She swayed, and Dr. Fraser moved quickly to steady her, guiding her back to her seat. Hastings, watching closely, noted the genuine anguish in her eyes, but also the way her hands clutched her shawl, as though anchoring herself.
"Your pain, it is understandable. But you too have held back. You told us your argument with Monsieur Carver was about his play. Yet you did not mention this letter he found. Did he share its contents with you?" Sylvia shook her head, her voice trembling. "He didn't tell me everything. He said it was dangerous, that it could ruin someone. He said it was about a deal gone wrong, something Charles did years ago. I begged him to let it go, but he wouldn't. He said the truth had to come out." The room erupted in murmurs. Sir Reginald's voice cut through the noise, sharp and accusing. "A deal gone wrong? Sounds like something Carver would stir up to make trouble. The man was a meddler, poking into things that didn't concern him." Clara Thorne's hand gripped her husband's arm, her voice low but urgent. "Reginald, please, don't make this worse." Poirot's eyes flicked to Clara, noting her distress. "Madame Thorne, you have been most silent. Yet you were seen near the library at 2, a time you claimed to be in your room. And now we hear of a letter, a secret tied to this house. Did Monsieur Carver confide in you, perhaps, about this betrayal?" Clara's face paled, and for a moment Hastings thought she might faint. I didn't know about any letter," she stammered. "Julian and I spoke sometimes, yes, but it was nothing improper. He was kind to me, that's all." Sir Reginald's face darkened. "Kind? Is that what you call it? I've seen the way he looked at you, Clara, and I won't have it said I stood by while—" "Enough!" The word burst from Clara, her voice raw with emotion. She rose, her hands shaking. "You're always so quick to judge, Reginald. Yes, I spoke to Julian, and yes, I was in the hall that night. But I didn't kill him. I saw something, and I've been too afraid to say." The room froze, every eye on Clara. Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but commanding. "What did you see, madame?" Clara's breath hitched, her eyes darting to the faces around her. "I saw a shadow moving in the library. It was just after 2. I didn't go in, but I heard a rustle, like papers being moved. I thought it was Julian working late, so I left. But now I think it was someone else." Sir Reginald stared at her, his anger giving way to confusion. "Why didn't you tell me this, Clara?" "Because I was afraid," she cried, her voice breaking. "Afraid of you, afraid of what?" Scratched loudly in her notebook, her eyes gleaming with interest. Dr. Fraser's calm facade seemed to falter for a moment, his fingers pausing in their rhythmic tapping. Sylvia's sobs had quieted, but her gaze was fixed on Clara, as though searching for something in her words. Poirot rose, his small frame commanding the room. "Mes amis, the truth is close, but it is fragile. A letter, a shadow, a betrayal, these are the threads we must weave together. I ask you to reflect on what you know, and to speak if you have held back. The murderer is among us, and they will not escape, Hercule Poirot." As the guests dispersed, their faces a mix of fear and suspicion, Hastings followed Poirot to the corridor. "That was a breakthrough, Poirot," he said, his voice low. "Clara's confession, it changes everything. Do you think she's telling the truth?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "She tells a truth, mon ami, but not the whole truth. Her fear, it is genuine, but it protects someone, perhaps herself, perhaps another. The shadow she saw, it is a clue we must pursue." As they returned to the library to re-examine the scene, the manor seemed to pulse with the weight of Clara's revelation. The lies were crumbling, and the emotional turning point had shifted the investigation, bringing Poirot one step closer to the heart of Ravencliff's deadly secret. Chapter 9. The Trap. The air in Ravencliff Manor was thick with tension as the second evening descended, the weight of Julian Carver's murder pressing down on the household like a storm cloud. The grand drawing room, where Hercule Poirot had gathered the guests once more, was bathed in the soft glow of candlelight. But the warmth did little to dispel the chill of suspicion that clung to every face. Captain Arthur Hastings stood by the door, his eyes scanning the assembled suspects. Lady Eleanor Ashbourne, Sir Reginald and Clara Thorne, Dr. Malcolm Fraser, Beatrice Fraser, and Sylvia Langdon. Each bore the marks of strain, their polite masks fraying under the relentless pressure of Poirot's investigation. Clara Thorne's emotional outburst earlier had cracked the facade of civility, and Poirot, ever the master of psychology, sensed the moment was ripe to tighten the net. He had devised a plan, a trap, subtle yet calculated, to provoke a reaction that might reveal the murderer. Hastings, privy to only part of the detective's strategy, felt a thrill of anticipation. "Truth." The guests shifted uneasily, their eyes darting to one another. Sylvia Langdon clutched her shawl, her face pale, while Clara Thorne's hands trembled in her lap. Sir Reginald's scowl deepened, and Dr. Fraser's calm demeanor seemed strained, his fingers gripping the arm of his chair. Beatrice Fraser, ever observant, scribbled in her notebook, her lips pursed in anticipation. Lady Eleanor, standing by the fireplace, maintained her composure, but her grey eyes betrayed a flicker of unease.
Poirot produced a folded piece of paper from his pocket, holding it aloft with a theatrical flourish. "This," he said, "is a copy of the letter Monsieur Carver found, a letter that threatened to expose a truth someone in this room wished to keep hidden. It speaks of a deal, a betrayal, and a wrong that cost dearly. I have read it, and I know its author." The room erupted in gasps. Sylvia's hand flew to her mouth, and Clara's eyes widened in panic. Sir Reginald growled, "What's this nonsense, Poirot? Show us the letter." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "In due time, Monsieur Thorne. But first, I must ask, why was this letter so dangerous? Why did it lead to murder? Let us consider the clues. A stopped clock at 2:15, a Turkish cigarette, a lipstick-stained glass, and a shadow in the library. Each points to a truth, but also to a deception." Hastings, watching closely, realized Poirot was bluffing. The letter in his hand was likely a blank sheet, a prop to unsettle the guilty. It was a classic Poirot tactic, designed to provoke a reaction, and the effect was immediate. Clara Thorne's breath hitched, and she leaned forward, her voice trembling. "You can't mean... You think I wrote it?" Poirot's gaze softened, but his tone remained firm. "Madame, you were seen near the library at 2, a time you denied. You spoke of a shadow, yet you withheld the truth about your meeting with Monsieur Carver. Did you write this letter, or did you know of it?" Clara shook her head vehemently. "I didn't write any letter. I told you. I only saw Julian briefly. He was upset, but he didn't mention anything about a letter." Sir Reginald's voice boomed. "Enough of this, Poirot. You're hounding my wife with no proof. If there's a letter, let's see it." Poirot's eyes twinkled, but he did not produce the paper. Instead, he turned to Sylvia Langdon. "Mademoiselle, you said Monsieur Carver spoke of a dangerous truth. Did he show you this letter, or hint at its contents?" Sylvia's eyes filled with tears. He mentioned a letter once, but he wouldn't let me read it. He said it was from someone close to Charles Ashbourne, someone who felt betrayed. He was going to use it in his play to expose the truth." Lady Eleanor's voice cut through the room, sharp and controlled. "Monsieur Poirot, this is absurd. If such a letter exists, it has nothing to do with me. Charles, no betrayal." Poirot's gaze locked onto hers. "Madame, your late husband was a man of secrets, was he not? Monsieur Carver's diary suggests he believed you knew of this letter. E.A. knows but denies, he wrote. Why would he suspect you?" Lady Eleanor's composure wavered, her hands clenching at her sides. "Julian was mistaken. He was always chasing scandals for his plays. If he found a letter, it was likely some old business correspondence, nothing more." Beatrice Fraser's voice, sharp and cutting, interrupted. "Oh, come now, Eleanor. Charles wasn't a saint. Everyone knew he made enemies in his business dealings. Shady deals, some said. Maybe Julian dug too deep and someone wanted him silenced." Dr. Fraser shot his sister a warning glance. "Beatrice, that's enough. You're speculating as always." Poirot seized the moment, his voice rising slightly. "Speculation, oui, but not without basis. Let us consider the Turkish cigarette, a brand smoked by the late Charles Ashbourne and found in Monsieur Carver's room. Yet only one was smoked in the library. Who placed it there and why? To point to Madame Ashbourne, perhaps? Or to obscure another truth?" The guests exchanged glances, the room crackling with tension. Hastings, watching closely, noted the way Dr. Fraser's calm facade seemed to falter, his eyes darting to Lady Eleanor. Sylvia's tears had stopped, her expression now one of wary calculation. Clara's hands twisted her handkerchief into knots, and Sir Reginald's face was a mask of barely contained fury. Poirot stepped forward, his voice dropping to a dramatic whisper. "And then there is the shadow Madame Thorne saw. A figure in the library moving papers. Was it the murderer searching for this letter? Or was it Monsieur Carver himself hiding it before his death? I propose a test. Let us search this room together now for any trace of this letter. If it is here, it will confirm my suspicions." The suggestion was a masterstroke, and Hastings marveled at Poirot's audacity. The guests hesitated, then rose, their movements reluctant but compelled by Poirot's commanding presence. They spread out, searching the drawing room's nooks and crannies, behind books, under cushions,
inside vases. Inspector Hargreaves, caught off guard, muttered about procedure but joined the search, his eyes never leaving Sylvia. As the search continued, Poirot watched, his gaze sharp and unyielding. Suddenly, Beatrice Fraser let out a cry, holding aloft a crumpled envelope she had found tucked inside a hollowed-out book on a shelf. "Here it is," she exclaimed, her voice triumphant. "An envelope, addressed to Charles Ashbourne." The room froze, all eyes on the envelope. Poirot took it carefully, noting the faded ink and the broken seal. Inside was a single sheet, its contents brief but damning. "You betrayed me, Charles. The deal was my ruin."
With a single initial. "Ah." Sir Reginald's face went pale, his voice hoarse. "That's not mine. I never wrote to Ashbourne." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Perhaps not, Monsieur Thorne, but this letter, it is the spark that lit the fire. Someone in this room knew of it, and it drove them to murder." The trap had been sprung, and the room erupted in accusations. Each guest pointing fingers, their secrets laid bare. Hastings knew the truth was close, but Poirot's calm demeanor suggested he was not yet ready to reveal the full picture. The letter was a key, but the final piece of the puzzle remained hidden, waiting to be uncovered in the shadows of Ravencliff Manor. Chapter 10. The Reveal. The atmosphere in Ravencliff Manor's drawing room was electric, charged with the raw energy of suspicion and fear as the guests stood frozen, their eyes fixed on the crumpled letter in Hercule Poirot's gloved hands. The candlelight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls, as though the manor itself were holding its breath. Captain Arthur Hastings, positioned near the fireplace, felt his pulse quicken, sensing that Poirot's carefully laid trap had ensnared its prey. The letter, signed with a single R, had ignited a firestorm of accusations, and now Poirot's moment of revelation was at hand. The detective stepped forward, his small frame commanding the room with an authority that belied his stature. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice steady and resonant. "We have reached the heart of this tragedy. The murder of Monsieur Julian Carver was no act of impulse, but a calculated deed, born of a secret that threatened to unravel the lives of those in this room. The letter, the cigarette, the stopped clock, the shadow in the library. These are the threads of a tapestry, and now Hercule Poirot shall weave them together to reveal the truth." The guests leaned forward, their faces a mixture of dread and anticipation. Sylvia Langdon's hands trembled, her eyes wide with fear. Clara Thorne clung to her husband's arm, her face pale, while Sir Reginald's scowl was tempered by a flicker of unease. Dr. Malcolm Fraser stood rigid, his calm facade cracking, and Beatrice Fraser's pen hovered over her notebook, her sharp eyes gleaming. Lady Eleanor Ashbourne, by the window, maintained her poise, but her clenched hands betrayed her tension. Poirot held up the letter, its faded ink stark against the paper. "This letter," he said, "was the spark that led to murder. Signed with an R, it accuses Charles Ashbourne of a betrayal, a deal that brought ruin. Monsieur Carver found it among Charles's papers and wove its truth into his play, a play that threatened to expose a secret someone could not bear. But who wrote it, and why did it lead to death?" He turned to Sir Reginald Thorne, who, "Close to your wife, did you write this letter, years ago, to Charles Ashbourne?" Sir Reginald's voice was a growl. "I told you, Poirot, I never wrote to Ashbourne. I had no dealings with him beyond casual acquaintance. This is a frame-up." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "A frame-up, you say? Perhaps. But let us consider the clues. The Turkish cigarette, a brand smoked by Charles Ashbourne and found in Monsieur Carver's room, was left in the library. Why? To point to Madame Ashbourne, perhaps?" He glanced at Lady Eleanor, who stiffened but said nothing. "Then there is the clock, stopped at 2:15. Yet the good doctor tells us death occurred earlier, between midnight and 1. Why stop the clock, to create a false alibi, or to mislead us about the time of the crime. And the lipstick on the glass, a bold shade, suited to the stage, but not exclusive to Mademoiselle Langdon. Sylvia's voice broke through, trembling but defiant. I didn't kill him. I love Julian, even if we argued. That letter, it's not mine. Poirot nodded, his gaze softening. I believe you, mademoiselle. Your grief, it is genuine. But someone wished us to think otherwise, to cast suspicion on you with the letter found in his room and the lipstick in the library. He turned to Clara Thorne, whose eyes widened in panic. Madame Thorne, you admitted to being near the library at 2, claiming to seek a book you cannot name. You saw a shadow, you said, moving papers. But what if you were the shadow, searching for this letter to protect a secret? Clara gasped, her hands flying to her face. No, I didn't kill him. I was afraid, yes, but I didn't do it. Sir Reginald surged to his feet, his voice booming. Leave her alone, Poirot. She's no murderer. Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. Calm yourself, monsieur. I do not accuse Madame Thorne, not yet. But let us turn to another clue. The singed note in Monsieur Carver's room, listing your initials, EA, RT, CT, MF, BF, SL. Why list you all, unless he suspected each of you held a piece of the truth? Beatrice Fraser's voice cut through, sharp and impatient. Enough games, Poirot. You know who did it, don't you? Out with it. Poirot smiled.
Secret. You heard voices in the library at 11, yet you did not investigate. Why? Because you knew who was there, did you not? Fraser's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. Poirot pressed on, his voice relentless. The letter, signed R, was not from Reginald Thorne, but from Robert Fraser, your late father. He was Charles Ashbourne's business partner, ruined by a deal Charles orchestrated. You found the letter among your father's papers, did you not? And when Monsieur Carver uncovered it, planning to expose it in his play, you could not allow it. It would ruin your reputation, your sister's, and rekindle old scandals. Beatrice Fraser's pen fell to the floor, her face pale. Malcolm, is this true? Fraser's voice was low, strained. You don't understand, Beatrice. Father's ruin destroyed us. I couldn't let Carver drag it all up again. Poirot's eyes gleamed. So you confronted him in the library late at night. You argued, and when he refused to destroy the letter, you struck him with the letter opener. You stopped the clock to confuse the time of death, left the cigarette to point to Lady Eleanor, and placed the lipstick-stained glass to implicate Mademoiselle Langdon. But you could not destroy the letter itself. It was too precious. So you hid it, hoping it would remain undiscovered. Fraser rose, his face ashen. You have no proof, Poirot. This is all conjecture. Poirot held up the envelope. This letter, found by Mademoiselle Fraser, bears your father's handwriting. I have compared it to documents in your room, and the cigarette? You took it from Carver's packet, knowing it would point to Madame Ashburn. The shadow Madame Thorne saw was you, searching for the letter after the deed was done. Fraser's shoulders slumped, his voice breaking. I didn't mean to kill him. I only wanted him to stop. He was going to ruin us all. The room erupted in gasps, Sylvia's sobs mingling with Beatrice's sharp cry. Inspector Hargreaves, stunned, moved to restrain Fraser, who offered no resistance. Lady Eleanor's face was a mask of relief and sorrow, while Clara clung to her husband, tears streaming down her cheeks. Poirot turned to the group, his voice sombre. The truth, it is painful, but it is necessary. Monsieur Carver's play was a mirror, reflecting the sins of the past. Dr. Fraser, in protecting his family's name, committed a crime that could not be hidden. As Fraser was led away, Hastings marvelled at Poirot's brilliance. The clues, the clock, the cigarette, the letter, had seemed scattered, but Poirot had woven them into a coherent whole, exposing the killer with surgical precision. The trap had closed, and the truth had emerged from the shadows of Ravencliff Manor.
Chapter 11. The Reflection. The morning sun rose over Ravencliff Manor, its golden rays piercing the mist that clung to the Devon hills, as though seeking to banish the shadows that had in occasion darkened the house for the past 2 days. The revelation of Dr. Malcolm Fraser's guilt had left the household in a state of stunned silence, the weight of his confession settling like dust after a storm. The drawing room, where Hercule Poirot had delivered his devastating denouement the previous night, was now quiet. The guests dispersed to their rooms to grapple with the truth. Captain Arthur Hastings, standing by the window, gazed out at the gardens, his mind replaying the extraordinary scene of Poirot's triumph. Hercule Poirot himself sat in a high-backed chair near the fireplace, his hands folded neatly in his lap, his moustache immaculate despite the late hour of the previous evening's drama. His eyes, sharp and reflective, seemed to see beyond the room, into the very heart of human nature. Hastings, ever the loyal companion, approached him, a mixture of awe and curiosity in his expression. "Poirot," Hastings said, settling into a chair opposite, "that was one of your finest moments. The way you unraveled it all, the letter, the cigarette, the clock, it was like watching a master painter complete a masterpiece. But how did you know it was Fraser?" Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile, his voice soft but resonant. "Mon cher Hastings, the truth, it is always there, waiting to be seen by those who use their little grey cells. The clues, they were like stars in a constellation. Each one alone means little, but together they form a pattern. The letter, signed R, was the key. But it was the human heart that revealed the murderer." Hastings leaned forward, eager for insight. "But the letter could have pointed to Sir Reginald. And the lipstick. Inspector Hargreaves was so sure it was Sylvia's." Poirot nodded, his eyes twinkling. "Oui, the red herrings, they were cleverly placed. The lipstick, it was a distraction, meant to cast suspicion on Mademoiselle Langdon. The cigarette, a nod to Madame Ashbourne's late husband, suggested her involvement. But the clock, the clock was the mistake. Stopped at 2:15. It was meant to confuse the time of death, but it told me the murderer wished to establish an alibi for that hour. Dr. Fraser, he was too careful, too composed, and his story of hearing voices in the library was too vague. He knew more than he admitted." Hastings frowned, still piecing it together. "And the letter? How did you know it was from Fraser's father?" "The handwriting," Poirot said simply. "When we searched the doctor's room, I found a medical journal with notes in his hand, but also an old letter from his father, Robert Fraser, kept as a memento. The script matched the letter found in the hollowed-out book. Robert Fraser was wound to tarnish the Fraser name further." Hastings shook his head, marveling. So Fraser killed him to protect his family's reputation. But to go to such lengths, the cigarette, the clock, the lipstick, it was so elaborate. "Précisément," Poirot said, his tone tinged with melancholy. "The human heart, it is capable of great cunning when driven by fear or shame. Dr. Fraser was a man of science, methodical, precise. He planned the murder to deflect suspicion, but he could not account for the little grey cells of Hercule Poirot." The door opened, and Lady Eleanor Ashbourne entered, her face drawn but composed. She approached Poirot, her grey eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice steady, "you have done us a great service, though the truth is painful. I never imagined Malcolm capable of such a thing." Poirot rose, bowing slightly. "Madame, the truth, it is often painful, but it is necessary. Your husband's past, it cast a long shadow, and Monsieur Carver's play stirred that shadow into life. Dr. Fraser acted to protect his family, but in doing so, he committed a crime that could not be hidden.
Lady Eleanor nodded, her hands clasped tightly. Charles was not a perfect man. His business dealings, they left many scars. I should have known Julian's curiosity would lead to trouble. Poirot's gaze softened. Do not blame yourself, madame. The fault lies with the one who chose violence over truth. You have been most gracious in allowing me to investigate. As Lady Eleanor left, Sylvia Langdon appeared, her face pale but resolute. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice trembling, I owe you an apology. I was so afraid you suspected me, but you saw the truth. Thank you. Poirot smiled gently. Mademoiselle, your love for Monsieur Carver was clear, even in your grief. The letter in his room, it was placed to mislead, but your heart spoke the truth. Sylvia nodded, tears welling in her eyes, and left quietly. Hastings watched her go, then turned to Poirot. What about Clara Thorne? She was so nervous, and that story about the shadow, do you think she knew more than she let on? Poirot's expression grew thoughtful. Madame Thorne? She was afraid, oui, but not of guilt. Her fear was for her husband's jealousy and for what she had seen. The shadow in the library was indeed Dr. Fraser, searching for the letter after the murder. Her lie about the book was to protect herself from Sir Reginald's wrath, but her confession helped us see the truth. Hastings sighed, leaning back in his chair.
But she lacked the full picture. She is perhaps too fond of drama, but not a murderer. As the morning wore on, the matter began to feel lighter, as though the revelation had lifted a weight from its walls. Inspector Hargreaves, chastened by his earlier missteps, approached Poirot with a grudging nod. You've got a knack for this, Poirot. I'll give you that. Fraser's confessed fully now, he's not fighting it. Poirot inclined his head.
The truth, Monsieur l'Inspecteur, it is a mirror. Once seen, it cannot be ignored. Dr. Fraser knew this when he confessed.
With the case resolved, Poirot and Hastings prepared to depart. As they stood in the grand hall, their bags packed, Poirot paused, his eyes sweeping over the portraits of the Ashbourne family.
This house, he said softly, it holds many secrets, but none so dark as the human heart. We have brought light to one, and that is enough.
Hastings smiled, adjusting his hat. You always say it's about the little gray cells, Poirot, but I think it's your heart that solves these cases, your understanding of people. Poirot's eyes twinkled.
Perhaps, mon ami, it is both, the heart and the mind. They work together to find the truth. Now come, London awaits, and I long for a cup of tisane in my own apartment.
As they stepped into the waiting car, the manor receded behind them, its gray stone facade serene once more. The mystery of Ravencliff had been solved, but Hastings knew that Poirot's reflections on human nature would linger, a reminder of the delicate balance between truth and deception. The departure from Ravencliff Manor had left a quiet void in Captain Arthur Hastings' mind. As the car rolled through the winding Devon lanes, the hills bathed in the soft light of late morning. Hercule Poirot sat beside him, his eyes half closed, his hands folded neatly over his walking stick, exuding an air of calm satisfaction. The resolution of Dr. Malcolm Fraser's guilt in the murder of Julian Carver had been a triumph of Poirot's little gray cells. Yet Hastings sensed an undercurrent of unease in the detective's demeanor, as though some detail lingered unresolved. Poirot, Hastings ventured, breaking the silence, you've done it again, solved the case with your usual brilliance, but I can't help feeling there's something more. You're not entirely satisfied, are you? Poirot's eyes opened, a faint smile playing beneath his mustache. Mon cher Hastings, you grow more perceptive with each case. Oui, the murder is solved, the guilty man confessed, but there is a thread, an unseen thread, that tugs at the mind of Hercule Poirot. The tapestry, it is complete, yet one stitch remains out of place. Hastings frowned, puzzled. What do you mean?
Thoughtful. The motive, mon ami. It is clear Dr. Fraser killed to protect his family's name. But the letter, the one signed R. It was not the only secret in Ravencliff. There is another truth, one that did not lead to murder, but which casts a shadow over the house. I wish to understand it before we leave this affair behind. Their return to the manor was prompted by a telegram from Lady Eleanor Ashbourne, delivered to their car just as they reached the outskirts of the village. It was brief, but urgent. Monsieur Poirot, I beg you return. There is something you must know. E.A. The message piqued Poirot's curiosity, and he instructed the driver to turn back, his expression one of quiet determination. They arrived at Ravencliff to find the manor subdued, the guests still reeling from the previous night's revelation. Lady Eleanor greeted them in the grand hall, her face pale but resolute. Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, she said, her voice low. I could not let you leave without telling you the truth. There is something I have withheld, not out of guilt, but out of shame. Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. Madame, the truth. It is always welcome, no matter how painful. Please, speak. She led them to the small parlor, where the morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating the polished furniture and the portrait of Charles Ashbourne above the fireplace. Lady Eleanor stood before it, her hands clasped tightly. The letter Julian found, she began. It was indeed from Robert Fraser, Malcolm's father. But there is more to the story. Charles. He was not the villain Julian's play made him out to be. The deal that ruined Robert was not Charles's doing alone. Poirot leaned forward, his attention rapt. Continue, madame. Lady Eleanor's voice trembled. Charles and Robert were partners in a shipping venture years ago. They trusted a third party, a man named Victor Grayson, the father of our butler. Victor betrayed them both, falsifying documents to siphon funds for himself. When the deal collapsed, Robert took the blame, as he was the public face of the partnership. Charles tried to help him, but Robert's pride refused it, and he wrote that letter in anger, believing Charles had betrayed him. Hastings's eyes widened. Grayson, the butler's father. Lady Eleanor nodded, yes. Victor disappeared after the scandal, leaving his family in disgrace. I took young Grayson into service out of guilt to give him a chance. But Julian, he found the letter in Charles's papers and assumed Charles was the betrayer. He didn't know about Victor. Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of sudden clarity. And Dr. Fraser, he knew this truth. Not all of it.
The truth about Victor. I should have told him, but I couldn't bear to reopen old wounds. Poirot's gaze softened. Madame, your silence, it was to protect the living, but it led to tragedy. Had Monsieur Carver known the truth, he might still be alive. Lady Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. I know. I thought I was protecting everyone, Malcolm, Grayson, even Charles's memory. But I was wrong. Hastings, moved by her confession, glanced at Poirot. This explains the cigarette, doesn't it? Fraser used it to point to Lady Eleanor, not knowing the full story. Oui, Poirot said, his voice thoughtful. And it explains the shadow in the library. Dr. Fraser was searching for the letter, but he did not find it because Mademoiselle Beatrice had already taken it, suspecting its importance. The pieces, they fit, but this unseen thread, Victor Grayson's betrayal, adds depth to the tragedy. They summoned Grayson, the butler, who entered with his usual dour expression, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of anxiety. Poirot questioned him gently, confirming that he knew of his father's role in the scandal, but had kept silent out of loyalty to Lady Eleanor. I never told a soul, Grayson said, his voice low. I thought it was buried with my father's death. Poirot nodded, dismissing him with a kind word. As Grayson left, Hastings turned to Poirot. This changes things, doesn't it? Fraser killed for a half-truth, and Lady Eleanor's silence made it worse. Precisement, Poirot said, rising. The human heart, it is fragile, mon ami. It clings to secrets, to pride, and in doing so it weaves a web of pain. Dr. Fraser's crime was born of misunderstanding. but it was a crime nonetheless.
Lady Eleanor, her composure restored, thanked them. "Monsieur Poirot, you have given us clarity, though it comes at a cost. I will ensure Malcolm's sister Beatrice is cared for. She deserves better than this shadow."
Poirot bowed. "Madame, you have done what is right. The truth, it heals, even when it hurts."
As they prepared to leave once more, Hastings felt a sense of closure, tempered by the melancholy of the truth uncovered. The unseen thread, Victor Grayson's betrayal, had woven through the lives of Ravencliff's inhabitants, leading to a murder born of misapprehension. Poirot's genius had unraveled it, but the cost was a reminder of the delicate balance between truth and silence. In the car, as Ravencliff receded into the distance, Poirot spoke softly.
"The world, it is full of such threads, Hastings. Secrets that bind us, truths that set us free. We must always seek the light, no matter how dim."
Hastings nodded, his admiration for Poirot deepening. The case was closed.
The car windows, its gentle hills and hedgerows, bathed in the soft light of midday, as Hercule Poirot and Captain Arthur Hastings made their way back toward Ravencliff Manor, following Lady Eleanor's urgent telegram. The revelation of Victor Grayson's betrayal had added a new layer to the tragedy of Julian Carver's murder, and Poirot's insistence on returning suggested that the case, though resolved in its essentials, held one final secret. Hastings, ever attuned to his friend's moods, noted the faint furrow in Poirot's brow, a sign that the detective's little grey cells was still at work, chasing an elusive thread. "Poirot," Hastings said, breaking the silence, "you've solved the murder, exposed Fraser's motive, and uncovered the truth about the letter. What could possibly bring us back? Surely there's nothing more to find." Poirot's eyes twinkled, though his expression remained serious. "Mon cher Hastings, the truth, it is like a symphony. Each movement builds to a crescendo, but sometimes there is an encore, a final note that completes the harmony. Lady Eleanor's confession about Victor Grayson was illuminating, but there is a question unanswered. Why did Monsieur Carver choose to pursue this secret so doggedly? I sense a personal connection, a motive beyond fame or scandal." They arrived at Ravencliff to find the manor quieter than before, the guests subdued, and the staff moving with the hushed efficiency of a house in mourning. Lady Eleanor greeted them in the grand hall, her silver hair catching the light, her face a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," she said, her voice steady but soft, "I cannot thank you enough for returning. There is one last matter I must share, something I could not bring myself to reveal last night." Poirot bowed slightly, his gaze attentive. "Madam, you have my full attention. Speak, and let us lay all secrets bare." She led them to the library, where the scene of Julian Carver's murder remained untouched, save for the removal of his body by the coroner. The stopped clock, the ashtray with its lone Turkish cigarette, and the lipstick-stained glass was still in place, silent witnesses to the crime. Lady Eleanor stood by the desk, her hands clasped tightly, and began to speak. "Julian Carver," she said, "was not just a friend of my late husband Charles. He was his son." The words struck like a thunderbolt. Hastings gasped, his mind reeling, while Poirot's expression remained impassive, though his eyes gleamed with sudden understanding. "His son?" Hastings exclaimed. "But how? Why was this never mentioned?" Lady Eleanor's voice trembled, her composure fraying. "It was a secret Charles kept even from me until his final days. Julia
Acknowledged him publicly. I only learned the truth after Charles's death, when I found letters between them in his study." Poirot nodded, his fingers brushing the edge of the desk.
"And Monsieur Carver, he knew of his parentage?"
"Yes," Lady Eleanor said, her eyes glistening. "He came to me last year after finding a letter from Charles in his mother's belongings. He was angry, hurt, but also determined to understand his father's life. That's why he was so obsessed with Charles's papers. with the letter from Robert Fraser. He believed it held the key to his father's character, a betrayal that shaped his own existence. Hastings shook his head, stunned. So his play, it wasn't just about scandal. It was personal. Précisément, Poirot said, his voice soft but firm. Monsieur Carver sought to reclaim his father's legacy, to expose the truth of his betrayal, not for fame, but for himself. This explains his persistence, his agitation. He was not merely a playwright, but a son, seeking answers. Lady Eleanor's shoulders sagged. I begged him to let it go, to leave the past buried. But he wouldn't listen. He said the play would be his way of honoring his mother and confronting his father's sins. I didn't know it would lead to his death. Poirot's gaze softened, but his mind was clearly racing. Madame, this truth, it changes much, yet it confirms the motive of Dr. Fraser. He feared the play would expose his father's ruin, not knowing it was also a son's quest for identity. The letter, it was the spark, but the true fire was Julian's need to know his father. Hastings, still processing the revelation, asked, "But why didn't you tell us sooner, Lady Eleanor? This could have changed everything." Lady Eleanor's voice broke. I was ashamed of Charles's secret, of my own silence. I thought I could protect Julian by keeping him at a distance, but I failed him, just as I failed Charles. Poirot placed a hand gently on her arm. Madame, you did not fail. You loved your husband, and you sought to protect his memory. The fault lies with those who chose violence over truth. Dr. Fraser's crime was born of fear, but Julian's death was a tragedy of the heart. They moved to the drawing room, where the remaining guests had gathered, unaware of Lady Eleanor's revelation. Poirot, sensing the need for closure, addressed them briefly. Mesdames et messieurs, he said, the case of Monsieur Carver's murder is closed, but there is one final truth you must know. Julian was the son of Charles Ashbourne, a secret that drove his pursuit of the letter and his play. His death was not only a crime, but a loss to a family he never fully knew. The room fell silent, the weight of the revelation settling over the guests. Sylvia Langdon's eyes filled with tears. Clara Thorne, clinging to her husband's arm, looked at Lady Eleanor with sympathy. You carried that alone, Eleanor. I'm so sorry. Beatrice Fraser, her notebook closed for once, nodded slowly. He was braver than I gave him credit for. To face that truth, to write it into a play, it was his way of claiming his place. Sir Reginald, his usual bluster-subdued, said nothing, his hand resting gently on Clara's. The room, once filled with suspicion, now held a shared sorrow, a recognition of the human cost of secrets. As Poirot and Hastings prepared to leave once more, Lady Eleanor thanked them, her voice steady despite her grief. Monsieur Poirot, you have given us truth, however painful. I'll ensure Julian's memory is honored, not as a victim, but as a son. Poirot bowed, his eyes kind. Madame, the truth, it is a gift, even when it wounds. You have given it to Julian and to us all. In the car, as Ravenscliffe faded into the distance, Hastings reflected on the echoes of truth that had reverberated through the manor. Poirot, he said, you always say it's about the little grey cells, but this case, it was about the heart, wasn't it? Poirot smiled, his gaze distant. Oui, mon ami. The mind solves the puzzle, but the heart understands the why. Julian Carver sought his father, and in doing so, he uncovered a truth that cost him his life. We have brought it to light, and that is enough. The car rolled on, the manor a fading silhouette against the hills, its echoes of truth lingering in the minds of those who had unraveled its secrets. The late afternoon sun bathed Ravenscliffe Manor in a golden glow, its rays filtering through the ancient oaks that lined the drive, as Hercule Poirot and Captain Arthur Hastings stood once more in the grand hall. The revelation of Julian Carver's parentage had cast a new light on the tragedy, deepening the sorrow that permeated the house. Yet Poirot's restless mind, ever attuned to the smallest discrepancies, suggested that one final piece of the puzzle remained. Hastings, sensing his friend's quiet intensity,
knew that their return to Ravencliff was not merely a formality, but a quest to tie up the last loose thread of the mystery. "Poirot," Hastings said, his voice low as they stood beneath the stern gaze of the Ashbourne family portraits. "You've solved the murder, uncovered Julian's connection to Charles Ashbourne, and exposed Victor Grayson's betrayal. What more could there be? Fraser's confessed, and the case is closed." Poirot's eyes gleamed, his moustache twitching with a familiar spark of curiosity. "Mon cher Hastings, a case is not truly closed until every question is answered. The murder of Monsieur Carver, it is solved, but there is a detail, a whisper in the background, that troubles me. The manuscript of his play, it has not been found. Why? And what did it contain that made it so dangerous?"
Hastings frowned, puzzled. The manuscript? But surely Fraser destroyed it to keep the letter's secret hidden. Poirot shook his head, his voice soft but firm. "Non, mon ami. If Dr. Fraser had found the manuscript, he would not have needed to search the library after the murder, as Madame Thorne's shadow suggested. The manuscript, it is still here, and it holds the final truth of Julian's intentions." Lady Eleanor Ashbourne joined them, her face etched with the strain of the past days, but softened by a resolve to see the matter through. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice steady, "you have given us so much already. Why return now? Is there more I must face?" Poirot bowed slightly, his expression kind but resolute. "Madame, you have been courageous in revealing the truth of Monsieur Carver's parentage. But there is one final piece, a document, perhaps, that completes the story of his play. I believe it is hidden in this house, and I ask your permission to search once more." Lady Eleanor nodded, her eyes reflecting a mix of hope and dread. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot. The library, Julian's room, anywhere you need. I want this to end, for all our sakes." Poirot and Hastings returned to the library, where the air still carried the faint scent of blood and brandy, a reminder of the crime that had shattered the manor's peace. The stopped clock, now ticking again after Poirot's earlier test, marked the passage of time with a steady rhythm. The ashtray with its Turkish cigarette and the lipstick-stained glass remained, silent witnesses to the drama that had unfolded. Poirot's attention turned to the bookshelves, his gloved hands moving carefully over the leather-bound volumes. "The manuscript," he mused. "It was too precious to Monsieur Carver to be left in plain sight, yet too important to destroy. He hid it, I think, where it would be safe but accessible." Hastings, ever practical, began searching the desk, rifling through drawers already examined by the police. "But where, Poirot? We've looked everywhere, his room, the library. If it's not here, could someone else have taken it?" Poirot paused, his fingers resting on a worn copy of King Lear. "The Raven," he said suddenly, his voice sharp with realization. "In his notes, Monsieur Carver wrote of the shadow of the Raven. We assumed it referred to Ravencliff, but what if it was more literal?" He pulled the book from the shelf, revealing a hidden compartment carved into the wood behind it. Inside was a slim manuscript, its pages bound with a ribbon, titled The Shadow of the Raven. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he opened it, scanning the handwritten pages. "Mon Dieu, Hastings, this is it. The play that cost him." The protagonist, a young artist, uncovered a letter revealing a business deal gone wrong, orchestrated by a trusted friend who vanished, leaving others to bear the shame. The parallels to Charles Ashbourne, Robert Fraser, and Victor Grayson were unmistakable. Hastings, reading over Poirot's shoulder, felt a chill. "It's all here. The letter. The betrayal. But it's not just about Charles, is it? It's about Julian himself, coming to terms with his father's choices." "Oui," Poirot said, his voice soft. This play was his catharsis, his way of reclaiming his identity. He did not seek to destroy, but to understand. And that, mon ami, is what made it so dangerous to Dr. Fraser. They summoned the remaining guests to the drawing room, where Poirot presented the manuscript. Sylvia Langdon, her eyes red but resolute,
took it with trembling hands. "This was his heart," she said, her voice breaking. "He poured everything into it, his pain, his hope. I wish I'd understood." Beatrice Fraser, her usual sharpness softened, nodded. "He was braver than I thought. To write this, knowing it would stir up so much. He was a true artist." Clara Thorne, clinging to Sir Reginald's arm, spoke softly. "I'm glad you found it, Monsieur Poirot. It gives his death meaning, somehow." Lady Eleanor, her face a mask of quiet sorrow, took the manuscript from Sylvia. "I will ensure it is published, as Julian would have wanted. His truth deserves to be heard." Poirot bowed, his expression somber. "Madame, you honor his memory. The play, it is not just a story, but a mirror to the soul of Ravencliff. Its truth has been revealed, and with it, the final pieces fall into place." As they prepared to leave, Hastings felt a sense of completion, the manuscript a testament to Julian's courage and the tragedy of his death. "Poirot," he said, as they stepped into the hall, "you found the play, but it was more than a clue, wasn't it? It was the heart of the case." Poirot's smile was tinged with melancholy. "Oui, mon ami. The heart of every crime is a human story. Love, loss, betrayal. Monsieur Carver's play was his voice, and we have ensured it will not be silenced." The manor loomed behind them as they stepped into the waiting car, its grey stone facade serene once more. The final pieces had been found, and the truth of Ravencliff's secrets lay bare. A legacy of pain and redemption, preserved in the pages of a playwright's dream. Chapter 15. The Quiet Exit. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft, amber glow over Ravencliff Manor, as Hercule Poirot and Captain Arthur Hastings prepared to depart. Motive behind his murder, but also the personal quest that had driven him to his doom. Hastings, standing by the car, felt a quiet satisfaction, tempered by the melancholy of a case that had uncovered so much human pain. Poirot, his impeccable suit as pristine as ever, adjusted his hat and surveyed the manor one last time, his sharp eyes lingering on its grey stone facade. "Mon cher Hastings," he said, his voice soft but resonant. "The affair of Ravencliff is concluded, but its echoes will linger. The human heart, it is a complex thing, full of secrets and dreams. No?" Hastings nodded, his thoughts drifting to the manuscript, now in Lady Eleanor's care, destined to be published as a testament to Julian's courage. "You've done it again, Poirot," he said, a smile tugging at his lips. "You found the truth, not just about the murder, but about Julian himself. That play, it was his way of making peace with his past." Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile breaking through his solemnity. "Oui, mon ami. Monsieur Carver was not merely a victim, but a poet of the soul. His play, it was his truth, and we have ensured it will not be forgotten." They were joined by Lady Eleanor, who emerged from the manor's great oak doors, her silver hair catching the last rays of sunlight. Her face, though marked by grief, held a newfound resolve, as though the weight of secrets had been lifted. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," she said, her voice steady, "I cannot thank you enough. You have brought light to our darkness, and Julian's legacy will live on through his work." Poirot bowed deeply, his eyes kind. "Madame, it is the duty of Hercule Poirot to seek the truth, no matter how hidden. You have shown great courage in facing the past, and in doing so, you honor your son." Lady Eleanor's eyes glistened, but she held her composure. "I will see to it that The Shadow of the Raven is published, as Julian intended. It will be his voice speaking to the world." Sylvia Langdon appeared behind her, her face pale but resolute. She clutched a small locket, a memento of Julian, and her voice trembled as she spoke.
Monsieur Poirot, you gave me answers, even when I doubted you. Julian's play, it's all I have left of him. Thank you for finding it." Poirot inclined his head, his expression gentle. "Mademoiselle, his love for you was in every line he wrote. Carry it with you, and he will never be truly gone." Clara Thorne and Sir Reginald stood nearby, their earlier tensions softened by the shared sorrow of the case's resolution. Clara's eyes were red, but she managed a smile under her arm, her sharp features softened by rare humility. "I underestimated Julian," she said, her voice low. "And you, Monsieur Poirot, you saw what I couldn't, the heart behind the mystery." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Mademoiselle, you saw much, but the truth, it requires the heart and the mind in harmony. Your observations, they were most helpful." As the guests returned to the manor, Hastings and Poirot climbed into the waiting car. The driver started the engine, and Ravencliff began to recede, its silhouette fading into the twilight. Hastings leaned back, reflecting on the case. The stopped clock, the Turkish cigarette, the lipstick-stained glass, the singed note, and the letter that had sparked to murder. Each clue had been a thread, woven by Poirot into a tapestry of truth. "Poirot," Hastings said, breaking the silence. "This case was different, wasn't it? It wasn't just about the crime, but about family, identity, and secrets buried too long." Poirot's eyes gleamed in the dim light. "Oui, mon ami. Every crime is a story, but this one was a tragedy of the heart. Monsieur Carver sought his father, and in doing so, he stirred a past that could not stay buried. Dr. Fraser, he acted out of fear, but his crime was born of love, for his family, for their name. The truth, it is a double-edged sword, cutting through lies but leaving wounds." Hastings nodded, his admiration for Poirot deepening. "And you, Poirot, you saw it all, from the smallest clue to the biggest truth. How do you do it, time after time?" Poirot chuckled softly, adjusting his gloves. "The little grey cells, Hastings, they see what others miss. But more than that, it is the understanding of human nature. We are all driven by love, fear, pride. To solve a crime, one must listen to these motives, and the truth will speak." As the car rolled towards London, the lights of Ravencliff Manor vanished into the night, leaving only the memory of its secrets. Poirot leaned back, his eyes closing, a faint smile on his lips. "And now, mon ami," he said, "I dream of a hot tisane and a quiet evening. The world, it will have another mystery soon enough. But for now, Hercule Poirot rests." Hastings smiled, settling into the journey, his mind filled with the echoes of Ravencliff, the pain, the truth, and the brilliance of the little Belgian detective who had brought it all to light. The case was closed, the manuscript found, and the manor's shadows dispelled, but the lessons of the heart would linger, a quiet reminder of the delicate balance between truth and redemption.